I'd like to try a thought experiment. Would you please close your eyes, if you're comfortable, and envision a justice leader? Okay, open your eyes. If you're home, type the name of the person you are envisioning in the chat. And if you're next to someone, share the name quickly with them. Who did you picture? Maybe a civil rights icon? Maybe on this holiday weekend, a labor organizer? How many of you envisioned yourselves? Maybe modesty prevented you from saying it, or I'm guessing more likely it did not occur to you. I wonder if this might be the year to shift that a bit. I think we all fundamentally want to do our part to improve our world, but maybe we don't know how. Or maybe we do know. We know we could call our representatives and express how we feel about an issue, for example, but we start to doubt whether we can make a difference alone. The Torah provides us some very important advice that can help snap us out of our feelings of inadequacy or futility. There are few biblical verses more famous than the double shot of justice we read this week. That instruction, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue, has garnered many interpretations over the centuries. What might we make of the repetition? Some authoritative sources have said that the repeated word means justice not just in word, but in action. Or justice not just for yourself and when you may benefit, but in fact when you might lose, but it's still the right thing to do. Or remembering that making change is not a one-time attempt, but an ongoing effort, a kind of Jewish, if at first you don't succeed. These are all worthy ideas. But I'd like to lift up a different explanation from the text. And it speaks to those of us who don't know what to do or might believe that what we do won't matter. If we keep reading past our famous verse, we can see that the Torah describes two different matters of justice in ancient Israelite history. One, situations to handle yourself. Two, matters that the text says are yipaleh, meaning extraordinary or beyond your power, where we might need higher authorities, the judicial system, the government. The first situation takes place when someone clearly violates a law against God, like engaging in blatant idol worship, considered a capital offense in those days. In that case, the text suggests that we could call out the violation and take immediate action. This category may no longer seem relevant because we no longer stone people and because we now respect people's religious differences. The second situation involved a more nuanced and complicated dispute between people, like an assault. In that case, we leave justice to the courts. We are very familiar with the second category, the yipaleh, the stuff that feels above our pay grade, the problems that we leave to others to decide. And when we don't believe that justice has been served, it's very easy for us to throw up our hands and lament that we have no role to play. I think the double use of the word tzedek to encompass both that which is totally in our control and that which requires the intervention of authorities is still relevant, but I'm going to suggest that these are not mutually exclusive categories today. Psalm 23 paints the image ma'agle tzedek, circles of justice. So perhaps we can think of these two categories of tzedek as concentric circles, representing different spheres of our influence. We don't always operate with the understanding that we built the outer circle, the systems that govern our society, and that we collectively can change them. I assure you that your voice matters when you call your representatives. I've lobbied in Albany many times, and I've seen staffers tally each phone call that they receive for and against an issue. To have impact in the circle, we need to partner with others, like the group of folks from Central who self-organized and together have written thousands of postcards, 3,500 and counting, to get out the vote, which is part of a larger effort from the reform movement and beyond, sending hundreds of thousands of postcards. But let's also narrow our camera lens and consider how that inner circle of tzedek may not only still be quite relevant, but also where we may have outsized influence. We observe acts of modern idol worship today. Greed, self-aggrandizement, abuses of power in our daily lives. The bully in a social situation, a customer mistreating an employee, an authority figure on a power trip. When we witness these acts, we can use our voices to call them out in the moment, in our families, in our workplaces, on our streets. Our portion in Deuteronomy teaches that justice depends on witnesses. Witnessing and naming what we see can be a way to throw metaphorical stones at a system that is violating the sanctity of God's creatures. There are many ways to interrupt a system of wrongdoing or indignity, starting with simply naming the truth. You might have gotten credit for something that you did not do. You might correct the record so that that person gets rewarded for their accomplishment. Or you may refuse to go along with a fiction. In her excellent new book on labor history called Fight Like Hell, author Kim Kelly recounts the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Fire near Washington Square Park, where 146 young women died, many leaping from the upper floors of a burning factory because the owners had routinely locked workers in to prevent unnecessary rest breaks. Rose Friedman, then 17, escaped by finding a way upstairs to the executive offices and realized that the bosses took a freight elevator to the roof, where firefighters helped them escape to a nearby building. The factory owner later tried to bribe Rose into denying that her fellow workers had been locked in. Instead of selling her silence, Rose spent her life attending events telling what really happened and advocating for workplace safety. This story reminds me of the blessing after the Haftorah, when we say, Emet vatzedek, truth and then righteousness. One could say that honesty is the midwife of justice. Speaking of honesty, we ought to acknowledge when we are the perpetrators of injustice ourselves. Those of us who are leaders in our own homes, teachers in classrooms, managers in businesses. We often make informal or formal rules about how to behave, who gets rewarded, when someone is reprimanded. Are we using our power responsibly? We at Central have a new way to hold ourselves accountable to pursuing righteousness in its many forms. Every time you work to improve our world in some way, we have these tzedek boxes to store diary entries about the choice that you made, your motivations, and the impact that you hope that it had. You can also make your own tzedek boxes out of a shoebox or a mason jar. In May, we'll come together, open our boxes individually, and see what their contents make us think. Each time you see your box and remember our verse of double tzedek, you might think of those concentric circles of your influence, what you can do to ensure our broader societal systems run fairly, and what you can do right outside your own window. You can not only put a slip of paper in when you help get a candidate elected, but also when you raise a question to make sure that service workers who support you are paid fairly. We don't need to put ourselves in the same upper orbit of the justice leaders we admire. We can start where we are and radiate outward. Shabbat Shalom.